Hello, boys and girls of credit union land, and welcome to the CUInsight Experience. My name is Randy Smith, and I'm one of the co-founders and the publisher of CUInsight.com, and it is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest from around the credit union community. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is Mr. George Hofheimer. George is the Executive Vice President of Research and Development at Filene. George and I have seen each other over the years at conferences, but have never really had a full conversation. See, the thing is, when you put two introverts together and they see each other, the extent of the conversation can just be as much as, "Good to see you again." We were seated at a table, though, earlier this year at the California wine auction, and we actually had a chance to talk, and I loved the conversation and knew that I had to get George on the podcast. In this episode, we talked about the work that the crew at Filene is doing currently, what George sees as the biggest challenges facing credit unions today and in the future. We talked quite a bit about the war for talent and diversity, equity, and inclusion in credit unions, and about his experience even in the Peace Corps and the effect that's had on his life overall. We even got into some adventures and things that George likes to do, outside of credit union world to create a little work-life balance. There is a lot of good that I'm sure you're going to find in the leadership and life hack section of the show, and we had a blast in the end, really having some fun wrapping it up with the rapid fire questions. So, without further ado, I give you my conversation with Mr. George Hofheimer. Enjoy. George, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Randy. It's great to be here.
I was looking forward to this conversation. You and I had one a couple months back, or a few months back now, at the California wine auction. Just a couple of introverts playing an extrovert on TV, standing in the corner. So I thought we would have a lot of fun today.
Yeah, I thought we did a pretty good job. We were a good job faking it, right?
Yeah, fake it till you make it, right? It's so funny, even since that conversation, to others that I've had during the past conference season, where people are like, "Oh yeah, I just need to go sleep when I get home." So some totally. Alone time. Hey, I wanted to jump right into the questions. I feel like at Filene, you guys, you have a front row seat at all the challenges that are facing credit unions, not only today, but going forward. Are there a few that, are really a focus for you today?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. We do sit in a really privileged position, which we take really seriously. We get invited into boardrooms and one-on-ones with CEOs and board chairs and other execs, and kind of hear their deepest, darkest thoughts and problems and issues. And then we try and translate that into research for the industry at whole. So, a few of the things that really do come to mind. Number one is the war for talent. A real desire to figure out how to attract and retain the best and brightest from the frontline staff all the way up to the boardroom. So that's a huge challenge that we hear, regardless of what size institution or where they're from or who they serve. People really do make the difference. And the second thing is really trying to keep up with this whole pace of emerging technology.
Yeah.
What's real, what's hype, how do you separate the two? And especially with a limited set of resources that every institution has, but credit unions especially, competing against really, really large institutions, they have to make really good investments. And it's not do or die for every investment, but that's a big one. And then an emerging one, which I think is tightly related to the war for talent, is diversity and equity and inclusion. It's a really important topic, and credit unions need to get serious about it. And I know that they have been, not just from a staffing perspective, but also from, how they present themselves in the community and the communities that they serve. So I would say that those are the three that we hear, in addition to the regular stuff of just running the business and keeping the lights on. But those are the big three that we are hearing lately.
I want to circle back actually on all three of those, but first, I assume most of the listeners know who Filene is, but if someone is unclear on the scope of work that you do there, could you give just the quick elevator pitch?
Yeah, sure. So we're a think tank. We were founded about 30 years ago by the industry to conduct research on behalf of the industry. We've changed over the years, so the real thing to know is that we focus in on the cutting edge research and innovation to help transform the industry and make it relevant today and into the future. We like to find people from the industry and outside the industry and connect them because we believe that bringing those folks together can be a pretty potent combination. People that they typically wouldn't interact with, like academics or startup communities or tech providers, or just interesting people. And then we truly and honestly believe in the really transformative power of innovation, and not innovation from like a fancy business talk perspective, but innovation from identifying problems and solving them in new and novel ways. That's kind of what it means to be a think tank in the credit union world. And that's what we aspire to be.
You know, a research-based organization. You're trying to tell us that facts still matter? No.
Yeah, we seek the truth.
Yeah, seek the truth.
Seek the truth. And we always tell folks, like, if you don't want to know the truth, don't ask the question. So.
That's I absolutely love that. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the work you guys do, and I have been for a long time. Like, to circle back, I know when Doug Layton was on from Visa, you know, he talked about the work Filene's doing on the war for talent and partnering with you guys on that. That just seems to be such I mean, it's a big thing in any industry, but, you know, as with the pace of change and the different opportunities that are out there and the gig economy, like, what is the path forward there in that war for talent for credit unions?
Yeah, you know, we've been really fortunate to have a research center funded by Visa in that area at the University of Texas. And we have this wonderful individual professor there. His name is Sekou Burmese. And he's really been helping us because his expertise is around that topic in particular. And we have the knowledge base about what's going on with our little industry. And he's been super helpful to figure out how to turn theory into practice. So we've been doing a lot of projects with him and working with credit unions to actually understand what the data is saying from an HR function. You know, a lot of people talk about consumer data or other internal data in credit unions. And we've been experimenting a lot with trying to understand, like, what is your HR data saying? Because, you know, a lot of the answers to what works and what doesn't in terms of attracting and retaining talent probably sits within your HR function, and maybe it's not highly tapped or utilized. So one example of that is, looking at different recruiting methods and actually conducting experiments with how you would recruit individuals into your credit union by doing a little bit of A/B testing in terms of how you present yourself to the general public or a subset of potential employees, and all the way up to trying to figure out, does the timing of when you recruit matter? Does the length of time between when someone starts an interview and stops and actually is offered the job, does that make a difference? So it's kind of the mundane and little things, but it really does matter. And then, you know, one of the really powerful things I talked about, like, just bringing these eclectic folks together. Sekou is friends with a guy who runs the sports management practice at the University of Texas Business School. And he used to be a recruiter for the NFL. And he also used to be a recruiter for West Virginia University's football team. And he made some really interesting parallels between the West Virginia University football team and credit unions, and that, you know, they both were smaller institutions competing against large folks.
Yep.
And, you know, trying to figure out what your differentiating factor is, and to really be able to have that value proposition and to be able to talk about it clearly. And in the case of West Virginia, it was, hey, you know what, your kid may not make it to the NFL, but I'm going to guarantee you that they're going to get a good education and they're going to have really good job prospects for themselves. So, you know, trying to figure out what your proposition is to the employee base. We're not Bank of America, we're not Wells Fargo, but each of these institutions that we all serve have some sort of unique factor that they can really embrace that, you know, on the surface may not sound amazing, but it is a differentiating factor for a lot of others. So it's, you know, it's that kind of thinking.
Yeah, that's good stuff. A question to go back to one of the other points of focus, does the war on talent also tie into the diversity, equity, and inclusion? I mean, if you're, take women in particular, that's half the workforce. If you're only drawing from half the pool, you know, that makes that war even tougher. So
no, absolutely. And, you know, I think, credit unions can look at some of the data just around the number of CEOs within our industry.
Yep.
With females at the helm, and, it tends to be concentrated at the lower asset size levels. So yes, absolutely. I mean, if we're not creating an inclusive environment and providing people equitable opportunities, it's not going to be inclusive, and we're going to be losing something along the way. So it's definitely interlinked, and that's kind of the next area of research and study that we're going to be looking at as it relates to the war for talent. It's all around diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I think that's fantastic. I've tried to make that a constant theme on the show, to just at least have those conversations about that, because to me, it is so important. And oftentimes you feel like whether it's people aren't getting the opportunity or we're losing good people because, the frustration level there. So I love hearing that you guys are going that direction. I was looking forward to asking you this question, and it's something that I've added to the podcast, over the past few episodes, but knowing what you do for a living, I was wondering what your reaction to, and I know it's a podcast so people can't see it, but what's your reaction to the phrase, "That's the way we've always done it"?
Well, so we don't hear that very often at Filene. As a think tank, we're pretty progressive in our thinking, and we're probably on the opposite end of it. It's like we have too many creative ideas. It's like sometimes we just need to settle down. But when people say that, I'm not a Midwesterner by birth, but I've lived here for half my life. Yep. And I think my reaction to that would be, "Isn't that interesting?" Which is the Midwestern nice way of saying, "Are you kidding me?"
I am from the Midwest, so that does ring true with me.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Southern version of bless your heart.
I also spent 15 years in the South, so I didn't realize that was an insult when I first moved down there.
You're like, everyone just loves me. They're blessing my heart all the time.
Everybody is blessing me constantly. Oh, so I love it. One of the things that both you and I have seen in our careers is the number of credit unions has been, cut in half, just in the past decade alone. You mentioned, some of the challenges that CUs are currently facing. Is there something that, like, you're seeing in the research that credit unions need to do sooner rather than later to not only stay relevant, but to thrive going forward?
Yeah, I've kind of learned that I think it's hard to talk about the industry as a collective, just because there's so many different models. But I think the one thing that does hold true, that I've seen work time and time again, is a really strong purpose and differentiation. And the best way I like to describe it is having a love-hate paradox. So if you were to take, what your differentiating factor is, or what your offering is, and were to present it to a group of 100 people in your community, to have a portion of the folks absolutely love what you're doing, and then the other portion absolutely hate it. We see this time and again with the really successful organizations, the ones that have kind of drawn a line in the sand and say, this is who we are and this is what we do. And, oh, by the way, we could do these other things, but we're not good at them. Or we just don't have the long-term capability to offer them, so we're just not going to do it. So, that can manifest in like the examples of Alliant Credit Union, headquartered in Chicago. Okay. They're a credit union for the workplace. And the workplace is now, it's not necessarily a physical location. And, for many years, they never really focused in on the branch network, but they're really, they're a $10+ billion organization with very, very few branches. So, if you were to say that to a collection of 100 people, maybe 15 would say, that sounds really cool. And the other 85 would be like, no, I need a branch. Right. Just trying to figure out what appeals to the kind of people that you can serve most effectively. Just yesterday, I was with a credit union out in California that serves firefighters. Yep. And, their product offering is not going to be relevant to the general public, but that's okay. And, they're quite successful, and they understand their model. They know who they are. They know what they're not, most importantly. And they just kind of hammer in on that difference. So I would say that, to me, from where I've been in my career in credit unions, is one of the more successful things that any credit union can do within their community. And it takes a little bit of bravery too, because you kind of have to take all the assumptions that everyone has about being a financial institution, and you have to say no to some things. Yeah.
Yeah, right. There's a question that I didn't send you but just popped into my head that I have asked others. And it's an interesting one because it was something that I think I've been saying for years, and that's that I think technology can be the great equalizer, especially for the smaller credit unions. And I can't say that I am as resolute in my answer to that anymore. And a lot of it comes from the data side, where it's almost like, talking to other people on the podcast, it's like he who has the most data wins almost, or maybe it's more what to do with the data, something that I think you were talking about even from the HR standpoint, which I'd never even thought about. But do you see, technology as something that could be an equalizer for credit unions, or, is it something that's, kind of hurts?
Yeah. So, this is a personal opinion, but based on a lot of experience with it. And, I think probably 10 to 15 years ago, technology was a differentiator.
Yep.
But now it seems to be a table stake.
I agree.
And I think, to your earlier point, that the number of credit unions has been cut in half since you and I started in the industry. Hopefully there's no correlation between our starting that and the number of institutions. But I tend to think that one of the key drivers of that is just the inability to keep up with technology.
Okay.
The basic fact is that, even though technology is everywhere, it's still super expensive to implement in a good way. So, in one sense, it's a driver of consolidation, but then in another sense, it's just kind of it's an expectation of consumers nowadays. And I would find it hard to figure out how to effectively differentiate for most institutions. Right. Some have definitely figured it out. They've figured out a service model that works and is their differentiating factor. But I think for most institutions, it's just going to be an expectation. And in fact, I think it's an expectation today.
Yep, I agree with you. One of the things and I look at just even like our company, there were so many things at CUInsight that maybe we wanted to do 10 years ago that we couldn't because it was too expensive. But now you don't need to own anything; you can just lease it, or monthly subscriptions. So, and I'm sure it's similar with the technology, just day to day that you all use over at Filene as well. It's made.
Yeah. Well, the really interesting thing, just being with a small organization where we're 30 people, is that you're right. The technology itself doesn't cost a lot of money, but you need to hire people or contract with people that know how to use the technology to actually make it work.
Absolutely.
And, it's nothing is out of the box anymore.
That is true. I agree with you there as well. If somebody's listening, they want to get more involved with Filene, whether it's on a personal level or, at the credit union level, what is the best path to take? And, we'll obviously link to everything in the show notes for people.
Yeah. Well, one of the cool things that we have a new office. I think you've been to our new office in Madison. CUNA Mutual has, and CUNA, this is credit union mecca here in this little town in the Midwest. For some accident of history, it's definitely not the weather,
right?
But we actually get a lot of credit unions coming through. I would say during the nice months,
yes,
which is
right.
It's all relative, but it's pretty much from April through November. We get a credit union a week that's coming through there that just learns a little bit more about what we do. So, people that are listening may find themselves coming through here just with trips to Madison.
Yep.
So, if you find yourself in little Madison, we'd love to see you. But on a more practical basis, there's some things that you can do. We have a number of events that are free to attend for our members. And, chances are the folks that are listening are probably members. So we have all of these events that are affiliated with universities and just really interesting collection of individuals. And then we have a variety of communities that, once again, are for our members. So we're a nonprofit organization. So to participate, you need to participate in the sustainability of Filene. But so we have a research council that's made up of CEOs that advises us on research. Our best known program is our I3 program.
Absolutely. Yep.
Which, as of this recording, when people are listening, will be into the recruitment phase for I3. So if you have anyone that's at the executive VP level within your credit union, it's a great development program to kind of learn new skills and talents. And we've tracked people over the 14 years of that program, and a good percentage of them go on to become CEOs of credit unions. And then kind of our newest one, but the most exciting one as well, is our Cooperative Trust program, our young adult programs, where you just provide people new in their careers where, quite honestly, jobs may not be as interesting a little bit later in your careers or less responsibility, but what we want to do is provide people an opportunity to understand what the big picture is by going to conferences. And then we have kind of side events that provide enrichment for those folks as well. And those are free to attend as well. So we're just trying to get this pipeline of folks interested in understanding the role of research and innovation in credit unions. So those are the big ways. And then you can obviously read our research on our website.
Absolutely. That's for sure. Follow the blog. You guys put out a lot of great stuff. So we'll link to all of that in the show notes for sure.
Cool.
I want to move forward, talk about a little leadership, the life hack section of the show. First question is, as always, is what inspired you to take the gig? Executive Vice President of Research and Development. You've been there 14 years now.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I'm a middle schooler now. So before that, I was at Credit Union Executive Society as their Chief Learning Officer.
Yep.
And a little over 14 years ago, Mark Meyer, our CEO, bought me a margarita and talked to me about coming on as the head of research there at Filene at the time. At the time, the research function was being fulfilled by a professor at the University of Wisconsin's Business School, and we were pulling out of the university setting and bringing research in-house. So I was always really impressed with Filene research when I got my hands on the then printed copies
Yep.
of the reports that would come through our office, and never really knew too much about it other than it was a really clever place, and the work that they were doing was pretty inspiring. So it was pretty cool opportunity, and Mark is a really inspiring guy to work with, very tiring to work with as well. He's got limitless energy. And so, at that point in my career, I was like, yeah, this is a great opportunity. So that's really what inspired me.
Has the inspiration changed with time on the job?
No, I mean, we talk about this all the time at Filene. Like if you're not having fun, if you're not getting energy from the job, it's time to move on. There's obviously peaks and valleys to any job, but really the inspiration to be this platform to multiply impact across an entire industry representing over 100 million people just in the United States alone. It's a pretty inspiring thing. The fact that we could institute a little bit of change to help improve people's lives to me, it's a pretty easy thing to get up in the morning and do.
Yeah, pretty cool thing to get to call a career, right? So, how would you describe your leadership style, and to follow up on that, how would your team at Filene?
Yeah, we've been absolutely blessed with our current staff and our past staff. We have this great group of alumni that are just doing amazing things across not just credit unions but the world. But if I were to say the people that have come across the Filene wagon and have participated with me, they would describe me as pretty mellow, and it kind of merges in with my style of just treating people like fully formed adults. May sound like a radical proposition, but my assumption is always that we hire people because we think that they have the skills and the ability to do their job, and that's always been my assumption, and that's how I would really describe the leadership style that I have. And so far, this whole concept of trusting people and treating them like adults has worked pretty well for me and the folks that I've worked with over the past several decades.
You've talked about the team there. What's the greatest strength of that team?
I would, besides the actual technical skills that everyone has, I mean, it's pretty amazing the things that people bring to the table. But I would really say it's the passion around the mission of serving consumers through credit unions. Everyone really gets the promise of what a credit union can do to transform someone's lives or a community's lives. And we see it every day with the staff, is that they really kind of can connect the dots between, how do you connect the dots between a research paper and impacting people's lives? And it's definitely in the front of everyone's mind.
That is good stuff. I would assume there's a lot of curiosity with everybody there too, just trying to think forward.
It's funny. It's funny you say that. Like, we've actually had to ease off the curiosity a little bit. We've gone through a variety of phases where we've just been too too creative, and I don't mean that like like, oh my gosh, we're the most creative people, but it's like we would get distracted by shiny objects, and there's lots of shiny objects out there. So curiosity used to be one of our core values, and now we don't list it as one of our core values. I mean, it's kind of an assumption. It's like a baseline of what you need. It's like, stop being so dang curious.
We've got to actually follow this one through. So
that's right.
Is there something that the team at Filene has heard you say so many times they could finish your sentence?
I don't think so. I like to kind of keep it a little weird for the team. Mostly I just kind of ask questions of people. Like we said at the beginning of this discussion, I'm pretty much an introvert. So my style is I like to ask people lots of questions. So they would probably say, he asks lots of questions.
Yes, lots of questions. Tell me more. I guess if we're...
Right. Isn't that interesting?
if they're talking, we don't have to, but we're on a podcast right now, so we both have to. So, when you think back to earlier in your career, is there a mistake that you made? And I would push this through even to that you see, you mentioned the Cooperative Trust. You work with a lot of up and coming young leaders. Is there a mistake that you see people make often earlier in their career?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely made this. Maybe it was because I was like too proud, and I definitely see this with people that are younger in their careers, but not asking for help or advice. It's really amazing the people that we get to touch through the Cooperative Trust, or we get the DE program coming through every quarter, our office. So we just get to meet all these really passionate people. I always say, when I talk to the Cooperative Trust folks or the DE folks, hey, we are a resource for you. And if you ever need any help or advice on anything, don't hesitate to call us or email us or Skype us. Very few people, I mean, I wouldn't say very few people, but, the people that have taken advantage of that, I think have found it to be a fruitful exercise. And a really good example of that is, I've got my oldest son, he's 24. He had a great group of friends growing up, and I would always tell them, I'm like, hey guys, if you are ever interested in getting into this weird field or you need any advice on anything, just let me know. And, only two of his friends took me up on the offer.
Yeah.
And, I was able to introduce them to two organizations where they eventually landed a job. And, I don't see that as like a burden for me. It's just like, I know these people and I know you guys, and, I'm benefit from my old age so that you can get a little bit further ahead. And, I would love people to take advantage of the knowledge that folks at Filene have to help better the industry. So
I remember on the first episode of the podcast with Jim Nussel, he said, well, if people have questions, just reach out to me. Here's my email. And I'm like, I'm not sure if you want to do that. And he's like, you'd be surprised how much I don't get many emails from people. It is. It's wild. So, but that it cracked me up. But especially in the credit union movement, in the space that we work in, people, to me, it's everybody's so friendly and everybody wants to help if they can. So I think that is great advice. And I a lot of the times I do think when we're younger, we put our heads down and think we have to do it or have to know everything ourselves instead of realizing how asking people questions can be amazing.
Yeah, it works. So like I remember I would cringe like with my parents. They'd be like, "You need to go network with this person or that person. They know so much about this or that." I'm like, I'm not talking to that person. But in retrospect, I probably should have.
We should have done.
I won't tell my parents I listen to this.
Yeah, don't have them listen. No,
they don't want to know that they're right. So.
Sorry, mom and dad. No.
Sorry, guys.
Was there a piece of advice or anything that like has really stuck with you through life that you find yourself, going back to still to this day, like a life lesson?
Yeah. So right out of college, I was in the Peace Corps.
No kidding.
Yeah. And had the benefit of having some older individuals. Peace Corps is typically like a right out of college type of thing. Yeah. Actually, my oldest son joined the Peace Corps. We brainwashed him. So
that's fantastic.
But, but we had a couple of individuals that were retired. Had very successful careers, and this one guy who had a very eclectic career. He started off as a professional bowler, and then became a very successful business person in the real estate industry. And over those years, he had some kind of ups and downs with with his family, ultimately leading to a divorce and all of that kind of not so fun stuff. And, it was kind of a simple piece of advice, but he's like, George, always leave work by 5. He's like, it's a marathon. You're never going to finish your work, but, just don't get caught up in all of this workaholic stuff because it's not worth it. And, the guy was probably 30 years my senior. At first I didn't believe him, being a skeptical young guy. But I've really found that to be true. And, it really does help, especially people that are super passionate about their work.
Absolutely.
They want to do so much. At least for me, that's worked. And then there's always a quote that I've found really inspiring, especially as I've gotten more senior in my career and had to have more opportunities where there's a lot of pressure to perform on a very public stage. And it's actually a quote from Billie Jean King, the tennis player. And she says, pressure is a privilege. And I really do agree with that because, you can kind of get worked up about, oh my gosh, delivering financial results or, delivering a presentation in front of these people or a planning session or, oh my gosh, this thing that I'm writing may end up in Congress. And, just recognizing that, that all that pressure, it's actually a privilege and, to kind of treat it like that. So
it took experiences to get you there. You just wasn't handed to you. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
What is there something? This was a question I was also really excited to ask you that I've asked most of the guests. Is like when you run into a wall, you work in a place where you're thinking all the time, right? So when you kind of just hit that wall, is there something that you do to whether it's take a step back, look at it from a different angle? Take a step away. I'm not to get to the other side.
Oh yeah. I frequently go on walks alone and just no technology or anything, just kind of get a different perspective on things. If people were to see me on one of those walks, they would think I'm like a zombie, or if they would say hi to me, I wouldn't recognize them because I kind of get into a zone where I'm just trying to figure stuff out. And I found that changing environments really does help, and just getting up and moving around and being outside just helps me. Yeah.
I share that as well. There's oftentimes I'm walking around with earbuds in my ear and nothing on them. And it's just so people don't talk to me. So I can just think.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea.
There's nothing playing. I'm just walking and thinking. So if you have a free day, there's nothing else on the calendar. What passions do you have outside of credit unions? What do you do to recharge? What is that? Yeah. You said leaving at 5. What does the work-life integration look like to you?
Yeah, that's a really important thing for me because, I think we all make our lives through a combination of inside work, outside work, family, church, whatever. And my real passions are soccer.
Okay.
And as I've aged and I can't play soccer as well as I once did, or that I think I can anymore. I've gotten into long distance cycling or touring, like bicycle touring.
Okay.
So this past fall, I went on a solo bike tour by myself, or solo tour, with all my gear strapped to my bike, point A to point B kind of stuff. And I have a goal and a dream to bike across the U.S. on one of these days.
Did I hear, is there going to be a trail or like a rail trail almost or something that you could take fully across?
Yeah. I think in about 5 years, they'll have the completed trail. There's a really cool organization called the Adventure Cycling Association.
Okay.
That they're a membership organization, but they also advocate for safe roads for bicyclists. And I don't know. I just love the whole long distance cycling. I never was into like cycling, like getting on the spandex and going real fast kind of stuff. But cycle touring, you've got these heavy steel bikes. You're loaded down with a lot of gear, so you can't go fast. So it really forces you to slow down, look around. And the tour that I did by myself was through the areas of the Grand Canyon. And
oh, no kidding.
It was my first solo tour, and I learned a heck of a lot, like what to do, what not to do. But it was super fun and really inspired me to get out there and do more. So.
How long were you gone for?
So I was planning to be gone for 2 weeks, but it only ended up being 10 days because of all places, there was a remnants of a hurricane that came through the southwest of the United States.
Okay.
So I learned about the proper equipment and pre-planning for all of those uncertainties. So but it did not discourage me. It made me want to do even more stuff. So, want to bike across the U.S. There's also a really cool off-road trail that's like 98% off-road that follows the Great Divide from Alberta, Canada to the Mexican border.
No kidding.
So yeah, I met a couple that was doing that on my trip, and they were just so chill and relaxed. And I was like, I want to be just like you guys one of these days.
You know what? I started probably 5 years ago taking solo trips, and it's something that, I still do to this day. At the end of the summer, I have a couple weeks that I'll just be on my own. And it's for me, it's a great way to think. It's a great way to recharge.
For sure, man.
I learned so much more about myself. I come back happier. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and you'll have to tell everyone about your trip to overseas when you get back.
Absolutely. I'm sure that's one thing that I always do love to talk about. So
that's great, man.
I want to be respectful of your time. Move into part 3, the rapid fire questions. The questions are rapid. Your answers don't have to be. Just a place for us to kind of get to know you a little bit better and have a little fun. So do you remember the first time that you got into trouble, like memorable trouble that you're willing to share?
Oh yeah, actually it was in the Peace Corps. Actually I met my wife there. We got into trouble a lot, but we got into real trouble. We were so this is the former Soviet Union in Uzbekistan. Okay. And so we were there. We were the first group of volunteers ever there. Right after a year after independence from the Soviet Union, so there was still a lot of rules that you had to. If you were going from one city to the other, you had to register in a place called the OVIR, which was kind of like. It was just like a registration office. And if you didn't and they caught you, you'd get in real big trouble. So, we learned the local language and felt pretty comfortable. So we went to this ancient city of Samarkand, and we were waiting at the bus station to go back to our little village or town. And the OVIR saw us, and they saw that we didn't look like everyone else. And they detained us for several hours and were demanding a shakedown. And as a Peace Corps volunteer, you don't have any money to shake the down. So we were just talking with them, and they were like looking through our stuff, and we thought we were going to get arrested. And my wife, who's a very wily person, we were just sitting in this detention room, and she noticed that the door was open, and she's like, "The door's open. Why don't we just leave?" So we just left and got on the bus and never saw them again.
Saw them again.
So if it was just me there, we would probably have been arrested. But my wife was like, "Let's just get out of here." So
you were like, "She's the one. I need this in my life."
Right. That's right.
That's awesome. Oh, that's so cool that you were in the Peace Corps too. And then you said one of your kids was also, or is, or
yep. Yeah. We're going there to visit him in a couple weeks. So
where is he stationed?
He's actually in the country right next door to where we were. He's in Kyrgyzstan, so it's like a very synchronous type of thing going on. So he's living in a little village up in the mountains, very different setting than we lived in a town of about 200,000 people.
Okay.
And he's the only American within a couple hours. So
that's wild. Yeah.
That's pretty brutal.
Good for him.
He's learned how to slaughter sheep and everything.
Oh, wow.
He's building skills for the future.
I think that's, you and I've talked before about travel, and it's something that is a passion of mine, but it was something that came to me very late. So I wasn't brought up thinking that was something you did. So, but I think that's fantastic. Do you have any daily routines that if you don't do them, your day just feels off?
Yeah, I have the best little dog in the world, and I take her for a walk every morning, and then every night when I come home from work, and it's great. Yeah, it's kind of a pattern. Like I like to have that time alone to recharge. But my dog is absolutely adorable. She's a complete mutt of we have no idea what. It looks like she's jumped out of the river. But it's just it's fun to walk around the neighborhood. We live in a really cool walkable area, and just kind of unwind. It really helps me relax.
I get it. The random question: what's the best album of all time? The one you can listen to without skipping a song.
Darkness on the Edge of Town, Bruce Springsteen.
There you go. We are, I think I'm going to create quite the playlist at the end of the year. There's been some cool answers. So, I'm a reader. We have a stack of books, all over the house, basically stacks of books and it keeps growing now with this podcast because people keep recommending even more. But is there a book that you've either gifted to people or recommended you'd think everybody should read over the years?
So I don't know. I don't think I've ever gifted it to people. I've recommended it to people, but I like nonfiction. And my favorite book that I've ever read was actually a biography of Sargent Shriver, and it's called Sarge. And for those of you who don't know Sargent Shriver, he was related to the Kennedys through marriage to one of the Kennedy children. He's the guy that started the Peace Corps.
Okay.
That's what he's most well known for, but he was also the go-to guy for the war on poverty during the Johnson administration. He started a variety of programs in the government and was tagged as a leading contender for being a presidential candidate, but always deferred to the Kennedy establishment and, probably could have had a good chance of winning. And then in his after his public life, he and his wife started Special Olympics. So just an absolutely fascinating guy.
You are adding to my book list. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Love that book.
Well, we'll be hitting up Amazon as soon as we get off. As you've gotten older, what's become more important to you? And often I think more interesting part of this question is what's become less important?
Yeah. I think, early on, my wife and I, we had kids really early. And, I always felt like I needed to be there all the time just because we were young parents. We had no idea what we were doing. So very reluctant to go and do stuff for myself. And, over the years, I found that it's really energizing for both me and my wife to find stuff that we both really like to do on our own. Just have your own hobbies. Just kind of accelerating that, I think, is really important to just keep everything fresh.
Yeah. There's a question that I didn't send you because it's top of mind. When you hear the word success, who's the first person who pops into your head?
Success. I would say a really good friend of mine, Rick Thomas.
How come?
So Rick and I met. The Peace Corps was a pretty foundational experience in my life. So Rick and I were placed in the same town, and he stayed in country for 20 years.
Wow.
And he started a business, joint venture with another guy to take raw materials from that country and turn them into materials that they could sell, mostly in the third world. And at one time, he was employing over 1,000 people in the town where we were Peace Corps volunteers. It was a manufacturing facility. But the problem was that he couldn't expatriate his profits.
Okay.
And he basically lost everything. And then came back to the States, came back to Ohio from where he was originally from. And he had no experience to speak of that could translate into any job. So he got a job at 7-Eleven initially, went back to school, got his master's degree. And now he's running a really cool company that works with Native American tribes and takes the seafood that they catch in the native way and distributes it all across the Northwest. So, in terms of success as a financial, he's not super rich, but just I look at that guy and all the chances that he's taken and, 20 years of your life in another country to have nothing to really show for it other than really great memories. And then to come back to the States and have to basically start all over again. He's a real inspiration to me. Really cool guy. I've been trying to get him into credit unions, but it hasn't worked.
It hasn't worked yet.
Let's try it. Let's get a campaign. We need Rick.
We need Rick. We'll start a hashtag and we'll give him his email out and people will start recruiting him. That's a great story. I absolutely love that. It's one of my favorite questions to ask because we all define success differently. I think it's an individual thing, right? You never know or what direction somebody's going to go. Again, thank you so much for taking the time and being on the show. The last question that I have of you is, do you have any final asks of, the listeners or any final thoughts you want to share today?
Well, I want to thank you too, Randy. I think what you're doing is really cool. Everyone, it seems, has a podcast, but there's very few podcasts that are really good, and I've really enjoyed listening to the ones that you put on. So thank you,
my friend. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think one thing that everyone can do, it's everyone's got a superpower. Whether it's like something super mundane, like how to do spreadsheets really well, or you're a good gardener, or you're just like a very empathetic person. Just for everyone to just do one thing every week, not even every day, just every week that takes your superpower and helps improve somebody's life, I think is kind of sounds trite, but if we could all do that, I think the world would be a little bit of a better place for us. So maybe a pay it forward kind of thing.
Pay it forward. Do it weekly for George. There we go.
Yeah, let's do it, man.
That is the perfect way to wrap it up. I've really enjoyed this. We will link to everything we talked about on the show today in the show notes. Do you have a preferred way? If people have more questions of you, is it through the Twitters? Is it, email? How can people get a hold of you?
It's myspace.com.
There you go.
It's my favorite. No, you can just reach me on email. It's probably the best. georgeh@filene.org. So yeah, I would love to chat with people. I know a lot of your listeners, but would love to chat with the folks that I don't know. For an introvert, I still like meeting people. So.
I still like meeting some new people and having those conversations. Right. So, George, thank you again. I hope you have a fantastic day. This has been a blast, and I hope everyone listening enjoys.
All right. Thanks, Randy.